It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Hey, welcome back to the Real Estate Breakfast, where we break down the Australian property market for you. What a week it has been. In fact, what a month it has been. Time to almost turn over a new page tomorrow with August arriving. You know, this spring market is looming large. Positivity for spring never ceases to amaze me, how this changing of season creates more optimism. You know, the way that people feel about spring. What about this year for you, though? Are you feeling upbeat or downbeat as spring approaches? You can let us know. We've got that sound off line, which is our voice recorder that is below in the show notes. Or you can send us an email to myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. Well, in relation to spring coming, Australia's auction market, that continues to be a major talking point because it is continuing to soften. Clearance rates are well below long-term averages. Are you considering right now taking your property to auction in Melbourne or Sydney? And if so, because of these lower auction clearance rates, how nervous are you feeling? Or do you feel that your property is likely to buck against in the auction space? Higher borrowing costs are also impacting Sydney and Melbourne. It doesn't help with the overall confidence in the marketplace right now. It is a Friday, July the 31st. Looking forward to another weekend coming up. Let's take you to Melbourne and catch up with Greg Brydon, who is the General Manager for Apollo Auctions, I think in New Zealand as well as Australia. You sound like a busy boy, Greg.
Good morning. Yes, certainly am, and do travel around most of Australia and New Zealand to catch up with my team. But Victoria is where I am based. It's where I call the majority of my auctions.
Let's just pick this up because, you know, these clearance rates are down. We were in Sydney yesterday talking to Veronica Morgan. It's a problem in Sydney. I did in the setup just sort of talk about asking people how are they feeling about taking their property to auction, because that's always the question in the vendor's mind. Could they buck with their property the trend and get a result? And no doubt you deal with that all the time.
Yeah, very much so. I probably have a bit of a different perspective to the wider marketplace in that we're looking comparatively at auction clearance rates and private treaty success rates for a comparable time period. Call it 30 days, which is a typical listing time for an auction, 4 weeks. The average private treaty success rate is somewhere sitting around 20 to 23% for the major capitals on the eastern seaboard, whereas the auction clearance rates have been hovering in that 45 to low 50 percentiles. So realistically, auctions are still a better way to sell. Yes, they are down from what they were this time last year, but at the same time, it is one step in the process to bring buyer and seller together, not so much focusing on selling under the hammer on the day.
What about vendors with their price correction in this market? Are they needing to adjust those expectations to meet today's more selective buyers? Because, you know, the buyers, they've got a hell of a lot more time these days.
We always ask the question of the sellers are we trying to get your price or are we trying to get the best market price? Now, a lot of the time they answer, oh no, I want my price. And I say, okay, well, if the best market price is above your price, which price would you like? And of course they lean towards getting the best market price. And then we ask if the best market price is below your price, which price would you like? And of course they want their own price. Auction is designed to bring the market to the seller. And sometimes if their price is misaligned with the marketplace, they completely miss that market and there is no market to be brought to them. So instead of being optimistic with price, which is typically what sellers have been over the last 2 to 5 years in most of the major capitals, they've got to start to really engage with that marketplace and understand where the market sits. And if they get competition, well, it can still create a great outcome for them.
Now, we've got first home buyers listening in. Yesterday, I was talking to Veronica there in Sydney just about this two-speed market, the affordability market, and then you've got your, more desirable properties. How is the auctions panning out from your perspective in this two-speed market, or is it not a thing in Melbourne?
It is a thing in Melbourne, very much so. And it's all about, so in Melbourne, we have disclosed pricing, which is coming into New South Wales. We call it a statement of information. And if that is misaligned with where the market sees value, we are seeing a lot of auctions that are postponing, that are selling prior or cancelling due to price being not aligned with the marketplace. However, in that band between sort of 500,000 and just sub $1 million, the auction market is still travelling pretty well. And a lot of those auctions are having 3 or 4 bidders competing for the property if they're seeing value.
So let me ask you this. While public auction competition has weakened, some properties are still selling through private negotiations after the auction. How big is that piece to the pie at the moment?
Quite a large portion of the pie. So we're finding that a lot of properties are selling within 7 days post the auction result, because up until auction day, it is all talk. It's talk from buyers, it's talk from vendors. People vote with their feet by turning up to auction and with their actions of bidding at auction. And a vendor can't hide from their reserve price at that point in time. And so actually understanding where the marketplace sits gives both sides, buyer and seller, the ability to understand, process that information, educate themselves, and hopefully align together to get a deal done. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely properties that are sitting on the market and becoming stale, that are sitting on the market 3, 4, 5 weeks post-auction. And unless you're heavily reducing price, you're typically going to sit there for a fairly long time at the moment.
And what about the spring market? Man, I just, as I said before, I just can't believe the way people are very optimistic. You would be hoping out of probably the last 5 years that really rings true, that people sort of get into the market around springtime.
What we're being really cautious of is the amount of listings coming to the market in one big glut. There's been a slow and steady feed of listings to the market, which has allowed that buyer demand to sort of take up all of the auctions that are coming through. What we don't want to see is heavily increased listing numbers over those first 4 weeks of spring through September, because that could create a really, really dangerous situation where there is a severe oversupply of property. Even though we're talking about a housing crisis and undersupply, there will be an oversupply of listings for the amount of buyers that are currently in that marketplace. So we're heavily watching that at the moment. There's 680 scheduled auctions in Victoria this weekend, tomorrow. And with that, that's about 13.5% down on this time last year.
I can tell that you work in the real estate game. I've heard that before. Yes, you don't want to see a glut of properties suddenly land in the spring market. So the underlying message there is try and get in before springtime arrives. We are talking to Greg in Melbourne. We've got more after this.
Listen to expert perspectives with exclusive real estate conversations and supercharge your knowledge base with us. Every morning from 6 a.m, we bring you the latest real estate news with diverse perspectives from leading industry experts. We deliver the most property podcasts across Australia every week.
Now, according to the ABC, thousands of Australians have discovered problems with mortgage offset accounts that were meant to reduce interest rate costs. More than $55 million have been paid out in compensation. And we've talked about this a lot. Mortgage offset accounts can be a very powerful way to reduce interest and pay off a loan sooner, but only if you are linked and operating it properly. The biggest concern is highlighted around offset account problems which remain hidden. Repayments may look normal while borrowers quietly pay more interest over time. So make sure that you look and check out that is all set up correctly with your offset account. It is a Real Estate Friday, weekend coming. Greg is here. Now, Greg, want to talk about the reserve price disclosure. Is that still likely to be passed in Victoria? What's going on?
Well, I can tell you that was the buzzword earlier in this week when Jacinta Allen resigned as Premier in Victoria. There was a lot of questions and my phone rang off the hook on that day regarding whether this is still going to go ahead. The interesting part is we have a framework for what it potentially looks like, but not how it's going to be applied. That is still a very grey area, and with time coming very, very quickly towards the 1st of October, it's still very grey and still up in the air.
And if people are outside of Melbourne, they might not be aware that Victoria does not have bidder registrations. And I would imagine that you get probably interstaters coming into Victoria. They land on auction day and they're not aware of a lot of things when it comes to auctions in Victoria.
Yeah, it's a really interesting scenario. You have to register to buy wine online or buy goods online a lot of the time via auction if you're on Grays or Mannheim in the auto auctions. But the biggest asset that people usually have, you don't have to register. I've had 3 properties in the last 12 months that the highest bidder above reserve price and sold under the hammer to them were not the eventual purchaser of the home. It's a really big blight on Victoria, to be honest, and it's something that we need to look into with anti-money laundering laws coming in and also just the transparency of auction.
Now, before I let you go, I do want you to give us a couple of auction tips. You know, somebody might be not all that familiar with turning up and making a bid on a property. Just step through maybe 2 of the fundamentals that people should be aware of if they're going to an auction this weekend in Melbourne.
My first tip is be the first bidder. The first bid is always the hardest. Now, that does seem self-serving as the auctioneer, but legitimately for a buyer, your first bid that you make is always the most difficult, and it is the cheapest bid that you will make for the day. Auctions typically go up, as well as the fact that you get to set the pace. The second tip is being able to eyeball your competition. So it's not talking about being intimidating and standing right next to who you think the other bidder is, but have the same vantage point as the auctioneer if you can. So standing on the same side of the road as them, not standing as far away as possible under a tree with a hat and sunglasses on trying to be inconspicuous. That doesn't work anymore.
And maybe put those 2-inch shoes on that elevates your height a little more.
I was quoted once about saying, dress up for the auction, wear your best Gucci, or if you've just been to Bali, wear your best Fucci, your fake Gucci to the auction, because looks do matter when you're at auction. If somebody is there dressed to the nines and they are bidding aggressively, it can actually really turn off the other bidders that are there because it seems like their budget is unlimited, where it may not be.
Yeah, and I always ask this of an auctioneer, the weirdest situation that you've had, you know, the strangest, the like, oh gosh, I can't believe that just happened. Have you got one of those?
I do, and it's told regularly. It's my 4th ever auction that I did back in 2016. It was a vacant block of land in Mordialloc that was the back of an old substation. It was owned by Southeast Water. We had protesters there because the next door neighbour had been using it as their backyard for the last 20 odd years, effectively, and they didn't want it to be developed. I didn't get the reserve price before the start of the auction because it was done by a government agency. So I had a gentleman at the back of the crowd called Rex who winked at me during the course of the auction to tell me it was on the market. And then we had Consumer Affairs there because they thought that we were underquoting, even though the property was being sold by a government agency.
Thanks, Greg, for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast. Good luck with all of those auctions that are coming to market tomorrow in the Melbourne property market. Good luck for spring as well.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Every morning from 6 a.m. across Australia, we deliver you the latest property news, commentary and predictions from Perth to Cairns and from Melbourne to Brisbane, 7 days a week.
With fewer buyers competing and investor activity easing, could this be the window that many people have been waiting for?
Well, I've been in real estate now for 26 years, and every time there's a window of opportunity, everybody predominantly sits on their hands and doesn't take advantage of it. So yes, there's a window of opportunity, but it's a little bit more complex than that. And it's what everyone complains about when prices are rising. They just want a break. They want prices to fall, but when prices fall, they go, oh, I don't want to buy now. I want to wait.
Human nature in all of this is let's just wait a little bit longer. And that is what you're talking about. That is the hardest probably piece in a softer market to educate people on.
Particularly with first home buyers, because, you know, in Australia, a lot are taking advantage of the 5% deposit scheme. That means that the needle doesn't have to move far for them to go into negative equity. So they're sort of thinking, well, God, you know, if I buy with only a 5% deposit plus paying costs, you know, I could end up with owing the bank more money than the property's worth.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.